The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 levels, a marvel of crystalline architecture that housed representatives from 47 spacefaring civilizations. Captain Daniel Foster sat in the observation gallery, watching the proceedings with barely concealed amusement. The Council had finally decided to formally examine humanity's entry into the galactic community, and they were starting with the most basic question: where did humans come from? Ambassador Lyra, a graceful with skin that shifted between lavender and silver, stood before the assembled delegates. She gestured toward the human delegation, her expression conveying something between curiosity and concern. The whispers began immediately. Most council members had never encountered a human before, and the ones that had seemed remarkably cautious about discussing it. "We would like to understand your species' origins," Lyra announced. "Your classification remains unclear in our records. Several reports classify Earth differently. Some call it a garden world. Others suggest it is a contested zone. We need clarity for our records." Daniel watched as his superior, Commanding Officer Elizabeth Cole, stood up. She was a woman in her late 50s with gray streaking her dark hair, sharp eyes that missed nothing, and the kind of calm demeanor that came from someone who had walked through fire and survived. She approached the central platform where a holographic display waited. "Earth," Elizabeth began, her voice steady and measured, "is classified as a death world class 12. The chamber erupted. Gasps echoed from the amphitheater. The Meridian delegates actually recoiled in their seats. A death world meant extreme conditions, overwhelming predators, impossible survival rates for unprepared species. Class 12 was on the higher end of the danger scale. Elizabeth allowed herself a small smile. "Before you assume anything, let me be more specific. Class 12 means the world itself is trying to kill you, constantly, personally, without mercy." Daniel felt the corner of his mouth twitch. He had heard this presentation before, but watching the council's faces was never old. "Elaborate," demanded Keeper Vex, a crystalline entity whose speech created harmonic vibrations in the air. "Volcanic activity on a scale you rarely see elsewhere," Elizabeth said, tapping the display. An image of Earth appeared, highlighted with fire and molten rock. "Earthquakes that reshape continents, hurricanes with wind speeds that would tear apart standard starship hulls, tsunamis that can cross entire oceans, tornadoes, wildfires, floods that drown civilizations, extreme temperatures ranging from 50 degrees below freezing to 50 degrees above." Another image showed predators. Sharks with rows of teeth, bears the size of small vehicles, snakes with venom potent enough to kill in minutes, spiders the size of a human hand, mosquitoes that carried diseases that killed millions. "And the diseases," Elizabeth continued, "are perhaps the worst part. Pathogens that attack with sophisticated evolution, viruses that mutate faster than you can develop vaccines, parasites that have spent millions of years perfecting how to destroy biological systems. We lose millions of people to infectious disease. Millions, every year." The chamber had gone quiet. Even the usually talkative traders from the commercial sector had stopped their background chatter. "Yet you survived," Lyra said slowly. "We didn't just survive," Elizabeth said, and now her expression became something sharper, more intense. "We flourished. Humans are apex predators. We hunted megafauna to extinction. We built civilizations despite everything trying to kill us. We learned to bend Earth to our will through sheer intelligence and cooperation. And we did it all without being the fastest, the strongest, or the most naturally resilient species on our world. We did it with our minds." Daniel noticed several delegates were taking notes now, interest replacing alarm. "We developed immunity to thousands of diseases. We created weapons to kill every predator that threatened us. We learned to predict hurricanes, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions. We built structures that could withstand forces that would level normal buildings. We turned our death world into a home so thoroughly that we forgot it was trying to kill us." She paused, letting that sink in. "And then we looked to the stars and asked what else was out there." Elizabeth smiled then, and it was the expression of someone who had survived everything the universe could throw at them and found it amusing rather than threatening. "So yes, Class 12, we are very aware of what that means. We didn't just live on a death world. We mastered it, conquered it, made it ours. That is what humanity comes from. That is why when you look at human soldiers, human scientists, human explorers, you should remember one thing: we were already trained by the hardest teacher in the galaxy." She stepped back from the platform. "And yes, before you ask, That smirk you see on every human face when we talk about our origins. That is because we find it genuinely funny that anything in the galaxy still surprises us. The chamber burst into chaos. Dozens of questions came at once. But Daniel was watching the council's primary voting bloc, the eternal ones who rarely showed emotion. They were conferring with each other, their ancient faces thoughtful. He caught Elizabeth's eye as she returned to the observation gallery. She winked at him. "Did I lay it on thick enough?" she whispered. "Just right, ma'am," Daniel replied. What the council didn't know yet was that Elizabeth hadn't exaggerated a single thing. Everything she had said was conservative, almost understated. She hadn't mentioned the actual survival rates for humans compared to other species in the same environments. She hadn't discussed the way human bodies adapted to stress through a process called. She hadn't explained that humans actually needed adversity to thrive, that comfort and ease made them restless and seeking challenges. And she definitely hadn't mentioned that humans bred like rabbits when they felt safe, and that Earth 2 weeks after Elizabeth's testimony, the Council commissioned a full survey of Earth. Not just the current state of human civilization, but the geological and biological records. They wanted to understand the Death World claim in detail. Daniel accompanied the survey team as the human liaison. The chief investigator was a named keeper, a being of pure intellect who had spent 300 years studying planetary systems. He moved through the records with the careful precision of someone examining holy texts. The first shock came when they reviewed the extinction data. "You have extinct megafauna here," observed, gesturing at the fossil records. "Massive predators, creatures that could crush a human with a single step. And yet the timeline suggests humans hunted many of them to extinction within 10,000 of your years." "Yes," Daniel confirmed. "We were very effective hunters." "But why?" another team member asked, a young named Krill who had never encountered death before and found the concept fascinating. "You could have coexisted. You could have stayed in small populations on marginal lands." Daniel considered how to explain this in a way that wouldn't sound like bragging. "Humans are cooperative. When we solve a problem, we share the solution. When we hunt something, we hunt it together. 10,000 humans hunting mammoths with spears and fire eventually. Well, there are no more mammoths. Not because we ate them all, but because we eliminated the threat they represented. We needed space for our families. We needed safety." Sequivalent of eyes widened. "You eliminated an apex predator threat, intentionally, collectively, to protect your young." "Multiple apex predators," Daniel said. "Saber-toothed cats, giant bears, short-faced bears, woolly rhinoceros, massive ground sloths. We hunted them because they hunted us." The team spent 6 hours just examining that data. The second shock came with the disease research. Keeper reviewed the medical history, watching the timeline of plagues, epidemics, and pandemics. "The Black Death," read, "wiped out between 70 and 100 million humans. That is nearly half your population at the time." "Yes," Daniel said quietly. "And you recovered." "We always do. Humans have a high reproduction rate. We learned, adapted, developed better sanitation, better medicine. Each plague made us smarter about the next one." Keeper Krill was visibly disturbed. "But the loss of life is almost incomprehensible. How did your species not collapse into despair?" Daniel thought about this carefully. "We have something built into us. It's hard to explain, but humans are stubborn. We don't give up. Losing half our population was a tragedy, but it also meant half of us survived. And the survivors had already proven they could endure anything. Their children inherited that strength, not through genetics, but through culture, through knowing their parents had lived through unimaginable horror and kept going." Return to the climate data. "Your planet has 17 ice ages in the last 2 million years, each one lasting tens of thousands of years. And humans not only survived each one, you expanded across the entire planet during the warmest periods, then endured when the cold returned." "That's what I meant about shaping our species," Daniel said. "An ice age isn't just cold, it's starvation, it's migration or death, it's figuring out how to survive with nothing. And we did it over and over." The third shock came when they reviewed modern military history. "You have destroyed cities," stated flatly, "with weapons. You have triggered nuclear explosions deliberately in wartime, resulting in the immediate deaths of approximately 200,000 humans in a single moment. Each, 2 different cities." "Hiroshima and Nagasaki," Daniel confirmed. "It was the end of the Second Global War." "You fought a global war. Keeper Krill whispered. You had the capacity to destroy your entire civilization, and you fought anyway. We found a way to stop, Daniel said. After we saw what those weapons could do, we developed a policy of mutually assured destruction. We threatened to destroy each other so thoroughly that we decided it wasn't worth fighting anymore. You threatened complete mutual annihilation, to prevent war, repeated slowly. It worked, Daniel pointed out. No nuclear weapons have been used in warfare since 1945. The research team spent the rest of the week in what appeared to be a processing state, moving quietly through the data, asking fewer questions as they discovered more. Humans hadn't just survived a death world. They had been shaped by it in fundamental ways. They were violent but capable of mercy. They were competitive but fundamentally cooperative. They were fragile individually but seemingly indestructible collectively. They could plan for their future while acting on impulse. They had created art and music and literature even during the darkest periods of their history, even while dying of plague and starvation. Most surprisingly to the team, humans weren't the product of their death world. They were the architects of it. Your scientists, said finally, have documented that your species is causing climate change, warming your planet deliberately through industrial processes. Yes, Daniel admitted. We're not proud of it, but yes. We became so good at surviving and thriving that we're actually in the process of changing our death world's climate. But that will kill millions of you, Krill protested. Probably, Daniel agreed. But humans are adaptable. We've survived worse. And now we're aware of 6 months into humanity's formal entry into galactic society, the first real crisis emerged. A small research station on the moon 442C had gone silent. The station housed a mixed crew, 30 humans, 15 scholars, and a handful of other species conducting joint research into the moon's mineral deposits. The Council dispatched a rescue mission immediately, but with a catch. The nearest military vessel was in warship, and the next human vessel was 4 weeks away. They decided not to wait. The warship arrived to find the station in lockdown. Internal systems had been disabled from the outside. Somehow, something had gotten inside the protected compound. What they found when they breached the outer airlock was a creature that shouldn't exist. The preliminary scans suggested it was some kind of parasitic organism, spread through the station's water system. It had a biological structure that seemed to rewrite itself constantly, adapting to the environment and to the immune systems of its hosts. 32 people were infected. The parasite had the ability to read neural patterns and copy them, essentially creating puppets of the people it infected. The commander, Captain, made the call that would haunt the Council for months afterward. She ordered the station's oxygen systems vented to space. Everyone inside died. All 45 crew members, infected and uninfected alike. When Elizabeth Cole received the news, she went very quiet. Then she called Daniel into her quarters on the human vessel that was still weeks away from 442C. They killed our people, she said simply. There were infected people, Daniel said, trying to process the decision. If the parasite spread to other stations. I know the logic, Elizabeth interrupted. I also know that if we let this stand, we're establishing a precedent. Young species can be eliminated at the convenience of the established powers. No trial, no council vote, just execution. She activated a communication channel to the council. Within hours, a formal investigation was announced, and the human contingent demanded the full technical data from the station. What they found changed everything. The parasite was real, but it was also dormant. The preliminary assessment had been incomplete. The organism couldn't actually survive in a fully oxygenated environment for more than a few hours. It was designed for a different atmospheric composition. Furthermore, the infected crew members were alive. The parasite didn't kill its hosts. It's simply their decision-making while preserving consciousness. They were aware but unable to control their own bodies. Which meant Captain had executed 32 innocent people, along with the 13 who were actually infected. Elizabeth presented this data to the council herself, and the chamber fell silent. You made a decision based on incomplete information, Elizabeth said, her voice steady and careful. That happens. What cannot happen is executing innocent people and then facing no consequences. What cannot happen is one species deciding that another species is too dangerous and therefore disposable. Its response came through the communication channel. The parasite represented an existential threat. The death of some to preserve the survival of many is an acceptable cost in such circumstances. It represented a potential threat, Elizabeth corrected. And you executed people who were conscious, aware, and not actually dangerous. That is not a military decision. That is genocide. The council chamber became a war of words and policies. Traditionalists argued that older species had the right to make survival decisions about younger ones. Progressives pointed out that the evidence was misinterpreted and the response excessive. And humans, unified for perhaps the first time as a galactic power, demanded accountability. Daniel watched as Elizabeth systematically dismantled every argument in its favor. She didn't use anger. She used facts. She pointed out that the humans had developed protocols for containing unknown biological threats, specifically because Earth had tried to kill them in exactly this way, through pathogens and parasites. We have had 10,000 years to develop procedures for this, Elizabeth said. Not through wars with alien species, but through survival on a death world. We know how to contain biological threats without killing the affected population. We have procedures, we have protocols, and we would have shared them freely if anyone had asked. The turning point came when the infected survivors were brought back, placed in quarantine, and the parasites were carefully extracted using human medical technology. 32 people, all alive, all recovered, all able to testify that they had been conscious the entire time, unable to move, unable to speak, forced to watch as their bodies moved under the parasite's control. Keeper spoke first, his ancient voice carrying weight accumulated over centuries. I have reviewed the evidence, he announced. The humans have demonstrated superior medical knowledge regarding parasitic organisms. The response was premature and excessive. I recommend formal charges against Captain for crimes against sapient life. Other council members followed. When the vote came down, it was nearly unanimous. Only 3 species abstained. Elizabeth didn't smile, not outwardly, but Daniel saw it in her eyes. What do you want? Demanded, her voice coming through the communication channel. Execution, do to me what I did to them. Elizabeth paused, and the entire chamber held its breath. This was the moment where humans would be defined. Would they demand vengeance? Would they execute in return? Would they become what they had been accused of being, ruthless killers with death world morality? I want the medical corps to work with my people, Elizabeth said finally. I want knowledge shared. I want protocols developed that the entire galaxy can use so that no one ever has to make the choice you made again. And I want you, Captain, to spend the next year reviewing my people 3 months after the incident. The Council voted on the expansion protocols, a set of guidelines that would define how younger species could grow into galactic civilization. The entire framework had been rewritten at human insistence. Elizabeth stood before the Council one final time before the vote, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood representatives from the 30 different human nations that now collectively represented Earth. They had come together, left their ancient rivalries behind, and presented as one voice. The old protocols were built on the assumption that younger species are fragile and need to be contained, Elizabeth began. The incident proved that assumption wrong. What fragile species can survive parasitic infection? What fragile species can maintain consciousness while its own body acts against its will? What fragile species can then show mercy to the ones who tried to execute them? She gestured to the data display. Humanity proposes a new framework. We call it the Mutual Growth Protocol. Under this system, younger species aren't restricted. Instead, they're integrated. We share knowledge. We work together. The older species leverage their experience. The younger species leverage their resilience and adaptability. Everyone grows stronger. A merchant representative stood up. This is idealistic nonsense. Some species are predatory, some are exploitative. We cannot simply trust everyone to act with honor. You don't have to, Elizabeth replied. That's why we have this council. That's why we have procedures for addressing violations. But preventing someone from becoming strong because you're afraid they might become dangerous, that's not governance. That's tyranny dressed up in protective language. Daniel watched from the observation gallery as other human representatives began speaking. They came from different nations that had once warred with each other, but now they spoke with one voice. They talked about protocols for training younger species militaries. They talked about joint research initiatives. They talked about creating pathways for younger species to join the council itself, not through permission, but through demonstrated capability and achievement. Earth spent most of its history with multiple nations, said Ambassador, a woman from the Middle Eastern delegation. We competed, we fought, we sometimes committed atrocities against each other, but we learned. We learned that cooperation was stronger than competition, that together we could solve problems that would destroy us individually, and now we're offering that knowledge to the galaxy. The vote came down just before the session ended. The expansion protocols passed with 70% support. But what made history wasn't the vote itself. It was what happened immediately after. The delegation requested formal acknowledgement of the role humans played in developing the new framework. Then, one by one, other species followed. The traitors. Even some of the conservative traditionalist factions voted for honorary recognition of human contribution. Elizabeth received the award, a crystalline structure that represented honor and contribution to galactic society, with quiet dignity. But as she held it, she made a comment that seemed minor at the time but would echo across the galaxy for years to come. A death world taught us something that centuries of civilization never could, she said. That strength isn't about how hard you are, it's about how much you can endure and still choose to be kind. That's what Earth gave us. That's what we're offering the galaxy. 3 human journalists in the observation gallery actually cried. Daniel wasn't one of them, but he felt something shift in his chest. What happened next was the most unexpected development of all. The other young species began approaching humans for mentorship. A newly spacefaring species from a frozen world asked for help developing thermal adaptation technology. The amphibious beings struggling with water supply management on their new colony requested human expertise in water purification. The young species weren't asking for permission or waiting for council approval. They were actively seeking to learn from humans because humanity had proven it wanted to help rather than control. By the end of the month, Elizabeth had established the Human Mentorship Initiative. The program was simple. Humans who had expertise would work with younger species to help them develop their own capabilities. Not doing the work for them, but teaching them how to do it themselves. That's the real edge humans have, Elizabeth explained to the Council's new oversight committee. Not weapons or combat training. It's our ability to survive under pressure and help others do the same. We've been doing it for our entire existence on Earth. Now we're doing it across the galaxy. The Ethical Keepers, a new faction that formed after the incident and focused on preventing Council overreach, formally recognized the Mentorship Initiative as a solution to the core problem. How do you bring younger species into galactic civilization without either controlling them or abandoning them? Daniel conducted the interview when a reporter from the news archive asked him about the program's success. It's working because it's honest, he said simply. We're not pretending we have all the answers, we're just sharing what we've learned. And we're learning from younger species too. That's mutual growth. That's how you build a civilization that lasts. Young species were developing faster than anyone had predicted. They had become specialists in extremophile technology. They had revolutionized water management across 4 systems. Though a species that had been on the edge of extinction due to low birth rates had learned reproduction acceleration techniques from human geneticists and were experiencing a cultural renaissance. And at the center of it all were humans, tireless, adaptable, and driven by a fundamental belief that problems existed to be solved. Elizabeth Cole stood in the grand chamber of the council as they prepared to make an announcement that would reshape galactic politics. She was being asked to step down as humanity's representative and take on a new role, chair of the council's Expansion and Integration Committee. It was unprecedented. No human had ever held such a position. It was also a position that had previously been held by the most senior and traditional council members. There will be opposition, the current council chair warned her during the private briefing. Many view this as too rapid an elevation of human influence. Then they can oppose, Elizabeth said simply. I didn't come into this position by avoiding conflict. Humans come from a death world. We're comfortable with conflict. We're comfortable with change. And we're comfortable with the idea that some people might disagree with us. The public announcement came during a full council session, with representatives from all 94 recognized spacefaring species present. The atmosphere in the chamber was tense. This was a statement about the future of galactic civilization. The current chair rose to speak. We stand at a turning point in our history. The expansion protocols have succeeded beyond our expectations. Young species are thriving. Cooperative initiatives are generating solutions to problems that have plagued us for centuries, and we have reached a consensus. This success is due in large part to one species' willingness to share their hard-won knowledge without demanding dominance in return. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. Therefore, the Council votes to invite humanity into the highest circle of governance. We invite Elizabeth Cole to serve as chair of the Expansion and Integration Committee, effective immediately. This is a lifetime appointment, contingent on continued merit and ethical conduct. The vote came down almost immediately. Only 5 species opposed. The rest voted in favor. Elizabeth accepted with her characteristic calm, but Daniel noticed something different in her expression. A kind of satisfaction that came from being recognized not for potential, but for what she had already accomplished. "I accept this responsibility on behalf of humanity," she said, her voice carrying through the chamber. "I accept it with the understanding that this role exists to help other species achieve their potential, not to enforce human values or beliefs. The Council's role is to facilitate growth, not control it. That's what humans learned on our death world. You can't force someone to become strong. You can only create conditions where they can become strong themselves." After the formal session ended, the informal conversations began. Species that had opposed the decision began approaching Elizabeth, not to congratulate her, but to negotiate. How would the Expansion Committee handle resource disputes between young species? What happened when young species wanted to arm themselves? How would the committee balance freedom with responsibility? Elizabeth answered every question with the same principle: transparency, mutual benefit, and the assumption that all species acting in good faith would find solutions that worked. That evening, Daniel found her in the observation deck of the Council's station, looking out at the planet they orbited. It was a garden world, temperate and beautiful, safe in ways that Earth could never be. "Regrets?" he asked. "Not one," Elizabeth said. "Though I do miss Earth. Even with all it's trying to kill you, there's nothing quite like a death world when you need perspective on what matters." "You made it sound poetic in there," Daniel said. "All that stuff about humans learning to survive." "Because it's the truth," Elizabeth replied. "Every human up here in this council, representing our species, learned something fundamental on Earth that other species had to learn through philosophy and theory. We learned it through survival. That's an advantage we should use, not hide." She turned to face him fully. "But it's also a responsibility. The galaxy is watching us. They're wondering if humans will become tyrants with our knowledge or teachers. They're wondering if we'll dominate or cooperate, and every decision we make will either confirm their hopes or their fears." "And the death world smile?" Daniel asked. "That famous expression everyone talks about." Elizabeth's expression shifted into that characteristic expression, that smirk that combined confidence, amusement, and something deeper, a kind of knowing contentment. "That's us remembering that nothing the galaxy throws at us will ever be as hard as what we already survived. Everything from here on is bonus, so why not smile?" Daniel found himself smiling too, the same expression spreading across his face. "The galaxy isn't ready for that kind of confidence," he said. "No," Elizabeth agreed. "But they will be, because we're going to teach them, not through force or control, but the way humans have always taught, by surviving, thriving, and extending our hands to help others do the same." They stood together in silence, watching the garden world turn below them. Somewhere on that planet, young species were working in collaboration with human mentors. They were learning not just technology and survival skills, but something more fundamental: the idea that any challenge, no matter how difficult, could be met with persistence, intelligence, and compassion. Back on Earth, the sun rose over the oceans that had tried to drown humanity, the mountains that had been shaped by geological forces trying to remake the planet, the jungles filled with predators and parasites and diseases. Earth didn't know that it had created something extraordinary, a species that had learned to thrive in the worst conditions the universe could offer, and then had learned to be kind about it. In the observation deck, 2 humans looked out at the galaxy and smiled the smile that would come to define human civilization among the stars. The death world smile, because humanity had learned what the rest of the galaxy was only beginning to understand. The most valuable strength isn't the ability to destroy. It's the ability to survive and still choose to be better. And that lesson, learned through millions of years on a world that wanted nothing more than to see them fail, was something no other species could ever fully replicate. But they could learn it, and humans would teach them. With patience, with confidence, and always with that characteristic, slightly amused smile. The reporter's follow-up question was the one everyone was thinking. Do you think the Council is right to welcome humanity so fully into galactic leadership? Daniel smiled then, the Death World smile that had become famous. The Council isn't welcoming humanity into leadership, he said carefully. The Council is recognizing that any species that survived a death world for millions of years and chose compassion over vengeance probably has something valuable to teach the galaxy. Leadership isn't something granted by a Council vote. It's earned through action, and humans have been earning it since we descended from the trees on Earth. That quote was replayed across 3 star systems in 2 days. Parasitic containment procedures. Personally, you will learn that there are better options than killing. His response was silence, but the effect was immediate. Humanity's willingness to show mercy after being wronged became the story that spread across the galaxy faster than any media system. The species that came from a death world hadn't become killers in their ascension to galactic prominence. They had become something more valuable. They had become wise. And every human in the chamber, when they learned the outcome, showed the death world smile. Because they had learned long ago that the best revenge wasn't destruction. It was survival. It was proving that you could face the worst circumstances and not just survive, but become better. A problem and working to fix it. We might change our death world, but we'll survive the change. We always do. When the team returned to the Council with their report, they brought something unexpected. A recommendation that humanity not be restricted in the way other young species were. Instead, they recommended that human expansion be monitored closely, with support, because the galaxy had just acquired a species that had been tested by the universe itself and passed every single test. And that smirk that appeared on every human face whenever this was mentioned. It became known as the Death World smile, because humans knew something the rest of the galaxy was only beginning to understand. The hardest tests made the strongest people. Its population had already exceeded 8 billion, before they even achieved space travel. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you took a species that had spent millions of years competing on a death world and gave them access to starships and interstellar resources. It would either be the best thing that ever happened to galactic civilization or the worst. Looking at Elizabeth's expression as she settled back in her seat, Daniel was pretty sure she didn't particularly care which it would be. Either way would be interesting, and humanity had never been afraid of interesting. The questions from the Council floor continued, but Elizabeth just smiled and let them wonder about all the things she hadn't said.